Welcome to The Political Bridge, the podcast where we connect diverse perspectives on today's most pressing issues. I'm your host, Ada, and today we're diving into the complex world of artificial intelligence regulation. Specifically, we're examining the recently proposed Protecting Consumers from Deceptive AI Act. This bipartisan bill aims to establish guardrails around AI's use, particularly concerning deepfakes and misinformation, by mandating disclosure and establishing penalties for deceptive practices. The question before us is this act an appropriate and effective legislative approach to regulating artificial intelligence? Joining me to dissect this are our usual insightful commentators, Nico, representing the conservative viewpoint, and Jordan, offering the progressive perspective. Nico, let's start with your opening thoughts on this proposed legislation.
Thank you, Ada. While the intent to protect consumers from deceptive AI is laudable, the Protecting Consumers from Deceptive AI Act risks stifling innovation and creating an overburdensome regulatory framework. Historically, government attempts to preemptively regulate rapidly evolving technologies have often led to unintended consequences, hindering growth rather than fostering responsible development. This act, with its broad definitions of deceptive AI and synthetic media, could inadvertently penalize legitimate uses of AI, such as creative content generation, satire, or even educational simulations. We should prioritize market-driven solutions and industry self-regulation, allowing companies to innovate and develop their own ethical guidelines, similar to how early internet protocols evolved. Overly prescriptive legislation now could lock us into outdated standards, making American AI less competitive globally, especially against nations with less stringent regulations. President Trump's administration has emphasized fostering innovation, and this bill, while well-intentioned, could contradict that principle by imposing premature and potentially stifling regulations on a nascent industry.
Nico, I appreciate the concern for innovation, but the Protecting Consumers from Deceptive AI Act is not just appropriate. It's a critical and necessary step to safeguard our democracy and individual rights. The rapid proliferation of sophisticated AI, particularly in generating deepfakes and synthetic media, poses an existential threat to truth and public trust. We've seen how even rudimentary AI can be weaponized to spread misinformation, manipulate elections, and commit fraud. Without clear legislative guardrails, we risk a future where distinguishing reality from fabrication becomes impossible, undermining informed consent and civic discourse. The Act's focus on mandatory disclosure for AI-generated content is a reasonable and essential measure, empowering consumers to make informed decisions. Waiting for market-driven solutions or self-regulation is insufficient. The potential for harm is too great and too immediate. This bill provides a foundational framework to hold bad actors accountable and protect vulnerable populations from exploitation, aligning with the progressive goal of ensuring technology serves humanity, not the other way around. We cannot afford to be reactive. Proactive legislation is paramount.
Both of you have laid out compelling initial arguments. Nico, concerned about stifling innovation and overregulation, while Jordan, you emphasize the urgent need for consumer protection and democratic integrity. Let's dig a bit deeper. The bill proposes that AI-generated content must be clearly labeled as such, particularly when it could be reasonably mistaken for genuine content. Nico, do you see any merit in this specific disclosure requirement, perhaps as a less intrusive form of regulation? Or do you still view it as an unnecessary burden on developers and content creators that could lead to a chilling effect on creative expression and technological advancement?
Ada, while the intent behind disclosure is understandable, the practical implementation poses significant challenges and potential for overreach. Defining what could be reasonably mistaken for genuine content is inherently subjective and could lead to a flood of litigation or overly cautious compliance that stifles innovation. Consider the complexity of identifying every AI-generated component in a piece of media. It's not always a simple binary. Moreover, mandating disclosure for all synthetic media, even for artistic or satirical purposes, could inadvertently diminish the value of genuine human creativity by blurring lines in an unhelpful way. The market is already developing tools for AI detection and provenance tracking. Let's allow these technological solutions to mature. We should be wary of government dictating content labels, especially when the technology is evolving so rapidly. This could create a bureaucratic nightmare, similar to how some past regulations, like certain aspects of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, have struggled to keep pace with technological change, ultimately benefiting large corporations with compliance departments more than small innovators.
Nico, I believe you're overstating the burden and underestimating the necessity. The disclosure requirement isn't about stifling creativity, it's about transparency and preventing malicious deception. We're not talking about requiring disclaimers on every Photoshop edit. We're talking about sophisticated AI that can generate hyper-realistic images, audio, and video designed to mislead. The reasonable person standard is a common legal principle and is perfectly applicable here. This isn't about chilling legitimate artistic expression. It's about preventing the weaponization of AI for fraud, harassment, and political destabilization. Furthermore, waiting for market solutions is a dangerous gamble. The incentives for bad actors to create undetectable deepfakes are immense, and relying solely on detection tools is a reactive strategy that will always be playing catch up. The former Biden administration also recognized the urgency of AI regulation, issuing executive orders on AI safety, highlighting the bipartisan concern. This act provides a proactive, essential layer of protection for consumers and our democratic processes, ensuring that people know when they are interacting with AI generated content that could be deceptive. Transparency is foundational to trust.
That brings us to a crucial point of divergence, the balance between innovation and protection. Jordan, you argue for proactive legislation to prevent harm, citing the potential for widespread deception. Nico, you're concerned about regulatory overreach, hindering technological progress. Let's steelman the other side for a moment. Nico, can you acknowledge the very real and immediate threat that sophisticated, undetectable deepfakes pose to individual privacy, reputation, and even national security, and how waiting for market solutions might be too slow or insufficient to counter these specific high-impact harms? And Jordan, can you acknowledge that overly broad or premature regulation could indeed inadvertently stifle the development of beneficial AI applications, potentially putting the U.S. at a disadvantage in a critical technological race, and that some level of industry self-governance might be more agile?
Ada, I absolutely acknowledge the very real and concerning threats posed by malicious deepfakes, particularly in areas like national security, financial fraud, and targeted disinformation campaigns. The potential for reputational damage and the erosion of trust is significant. My concern isn't that these threats don't exist, but rather with the proposed solution. While the Protecting Consumers from Deceptive AI Act aims to address these, I fear its broad brush might catch too many legitimate uses. For instance, AI in medical imaging or drug discovery, while not deceptive, could fall under vague definitions of synthetic media if not carefully crafted, leading to unnecessary compliance burdens. The challenge is to target the malicious actors without inadvertently penalizing the vast majority of beneficial AI development. A more targeted approach, perhaps focusing on criminal intent or specific high-risk applications, rather than a blanket disclosure, might be more effective and less damaging to the broader innovation ecosystem that President Trump champions.
Nico, I can certainly acknowledge the risk of stifling innovation if legislation is poorly constructed or overly broad. The goal is absolutely not to impede progress in beneficial AI applications, such as those in healthcare, climate modeling, or accessibility tools. And yes, industry self-governance can play a role in developing best practices and ethical guidelines. However, history shows that relying solely on self-governance often falls short when profit motives or competitive pressures outweigh ethical considerations, especially in the absence of legal accountability. The Protecting Consumers from Deceptive AI Act attempts to strike this balance by focusing on deceptive intent and content that could reasonably mislead, rather than all AI-generated content. It's a starting point, not a final answer, and can be refined. The urgency of preventing widespread societal harm from unchecked AI, particularly in areas like election integrity and personal privacy, outweighs the risk of minor inconveniences to innovators. We must ensure that the foundational ethical principles are enshrined in law to guide development, not just leave it to corporate discretion.
Thank you, Nico and Jordan, for this incredibly insightful and nuanced discussion on the Protecting Consumers from Deceptive AI Act. It's clear that while both sides recognize the immense potential and inherent risks of AI, there's a significant debate on the most effective and appropriate legislative path forward. Whether it's prioritizing innovation and market-driven solutions or emphasizing proactive regulation and consumer protection, the conversation around AI governance is only just beginning. We hope this discussion has provided you, our listeners, with a clearer understanding of the complexities involved. We encourage you to research the proposed Protecting Consumers from Deceptive AI Act further and form your own informed opinions. Join us next time on The Political Bridge for another deep dive into the issues shaping our world. Until then, stay informed